Up into the ether, I built the sky. This is Aurian Archive. Let's get started with why the steam machine may be more powerful than we think, and how we can determine this based on history. Now, as you've probably noticed already from the start of this stream, that I'm on a different system than what I normally use. We are actually on what I routinely refer to as the media server. And as you might notice, there is an NVIDIA X serving sitting down here because I do kind of try and make a effort to show what hardware I personally am running on. And yes, I have a 1660 Ti, and it has come up in the past. Why don't I just replace the dying R929X in my primary computer with the 1660 Ti that is fully functional? Well, that's because it's not fully functional. NVIDIA drivers. Okay. Let me try, instead of making blanket statements, frame what my personal experience was with NVIDIA cards. I have not used NVIDIA cards since I had a triple SLI system, which I think was a GTS 253 of them. And the triple SLI never quite worked. I never actually saw any performance boost from having all three cards running at the same time versus over one card. Yeah, it could run all of the fancy tech demos, but the compute offload to the third card never really worked. The just SLI and two cards it never delivered on what Nvidia's marketing said it could do. It just never did. And I was perfectly happy with AMD cards. And one of the reasons why I'm perfectly happy with AMD cards, and we'll look this up, we can do AMD open source. And AMD has a pretty good record of releasing the hardware specifications and the software specifications used to make their drivers and what actually powers their hardware. Going back as far as the Radeon or the Radeon 8500 and Radeon 7500, and even some documents on the Rage series before that. AMD's open source drivers, what was being performed by the X.org Radeon driver, and we'll go ahead and look that up too. As we go over and look at this, and we have the driver for Radeon HD, for AMD GPG R5X, R6X, R7X, and we look through the various drivers, we find that they were adding in hardware features that AMD's commercial drivers, the ones you could actually download off AMD.com or ATI.com before that, were they not only added more features, they also added more performance towards the end of its life, almost of the life of the Catalyst series of drivers. The Radeon open source drivers were, in most cases, outperforming the Catalyst drivers on the same software, on the same hardware. And I say software as in the application that's running, be it a game, a computational package, or whatever. The open source drivers were simply faster. They didn't have the overhead, they didn't have the legacy cruft, they didn't have preconceived notions of how the drivers should work. And because of those open source drivers, and since I was primarily a Linux user, not a Windows user, I didn't really have a reason to look at NVIDIA. There just wasn't one. And then the 1660 came out. And at that time, we were already going into the full blown crypto miner, buying all the high end cards. I refer to it as an inverse reverse Ponzi scheme that's been modified for a diverted payout. And if you followed that, then you might have a good idea of why Bitcoin and digital currencies won't work to begin with. But this stream isn't about this. We want to get back to the SteamDeck, but before I get to the SteamDeck, I want to talk about why drivers matter and why NVIDIA's is not an option. We know from Microsoft, NVIDIA, Xbox. Okay, we know that NVIDIA and Microsoft had a spat over the Xbox. We know, and this is going back several years, we know that the original Xbox, which did use NVIDIA hardware, technically it was not what I think they said it was. It was like a step down, but had an increased cache count. I'd have to go look it up again. At the NV2A, did I just get that right? NV2A. search NV2A. Yeah, NV2A. Yeah, they described it as GeForce 3 based. I wouldn't have really called it GeForce 3 based, but whatever. NVIDIA has a weird internal consistency in that they don't have consistency at all. Well, NVIDIA blew it with Microsoft. Microsoft found NVIDIA almost very difficult to work with. And then along came another competitor, Sony, PlayStation 3, NVIDIA. And again, we have the Sony PlayStation 3 with the NVIDIA graphics processor, and oh yeah, that's right. Sony said that they had a lot of problems with NVIDIA and dropped NVIDIA. And then, okay, the most popular console right now, Nintendo Switch, Tegra X1. Nintendo, famous, I mean literally famous for using hardware that is electrically inadequate and totally unsuited for their purpose that costs too much. Nintendo went to NVIDIA. Nintendo went to NVIDIA like the promoted graphics king, and then grabbed a standard. PC Mag actually says it best here. Uses a standard Tegra X1 processor. And that at first was very confusing because it was like Donald Trump going to a Koenigsegg dealership. And Koenigsegg's like, woo! Donald Trump is getting one of our cars! Woohoo! Yeah! What can we say? And he kind of walking around and he's kicking the tires, kind of doing that old car shopping thing, and he finally comes around to a Fiat 500 that's in the back. It's kind of stripped out. Is the dealer's owner has this. He bought it for his son because his son's only like in his teens, and Trump's kind of looking at this and goes, you know what? I'll take this one. And everyone at the dealer kind of stops. You just walked past all of these very high-powered, very fancy, very expensive, very capable, exotic cars, and you pick out the Fiat that's only on the lot because it's a project for the owner's kid? And Trump comes back, yeah, I just want it for Barron. Let that frame what it was like for Nintendo to walk into NVIDIA and walk out with the Tegra X1. Electrically inadequate, the Tegra X1 had long been surpassed by multiple iterations of other products. The Tegra X1 was not a highlight of NVIDIA's product portfolio. On top of that, Nintendo never did anything with the Switch that would make use of NVIDIA's very good technologies. Let's say doing the NVIDIA, what is it? NVIDIA Link, X-Point, not X-Point. I will look up this. NVIDIA, NVLink. The NVLink high-speed direct GPU to GPU interconnect. Nintendo never used NVLink over USB Type-C to add an additional graphics processor or processing capabilities to the Switch. That would have been amazing and would have allowed the Switch in its dock to offer a docked console experience, not our game barely runs in 720 and it certainly isn't going to run in 1080. Fairy tale. So, we get back to sewing things together again. Nintendo picked kind of just the wrong product. What they really grabbed was just a Shield tablet, slapped the Nintendo name on it, said end of, that's it, we're done. We've got everything we wanted. Now, there actually was a brilliant reason Nintendo did that. NVIDIA's reputation to its partners who invest in hardware parts is not good. NVIDIA has ruined its relationship with Microsoft. It ruined its relationship with Sony. It routinely trades blows with automakers who routinely say, for regulatory purposes, we need access to your NVIDIA driver source code. And NVIDIA's like, what do you mean you need access to our source code? You don't need access to our source code. And automobile manufacturers going, yeah, we kind of need access to your source code. We need an open source driver for legal and regulatory reasons. We can't use the proprietary driver package that we can't look at the source code on. And Nvidia's kind of telling, what do you mean you need open source? What's this open source thing? Does anyone know what open source is? And kind of looking at each other in a room, and the automobile manufacturers are just doing face palm to the head. Nvidia is a terrible graphics company. Nvidia is not interested in gaming. Nvidia, and I'm saying this for a fact, knowingly sold chips to manufacturers that would be used by the Chinese Communist Party in mining rigs to run calculatory control over digital currencies. Nvidia's CEO is aware of this, was aware of that, and still went ahead and did it anyways. Nvidia is a bad company. Period. Stop. End of story. Okay. Why am I still using an Nvidia card if I despise them so much? Well, I really didn't after the 1660. The direct sale of NVIDIA GPUs and then AMD GPUs, although I really don't think I have not seen any evidence suggesting that Dr. Lisa Su or any of her executive staff at that time were aware that their manufacturing partners were being ordered to sell cards first to Bitcoin miners by the CCP. I've seen no evidence of that. I have seen evidence that NVIDIA was aware and was willingly engaging in that practice. You haven't really been able to buy a graphics card unless you bought from a scalper who was reselling a graphics card that was decommissioned from a mining rig. Let that sink in. The only graphics cards you could buy were graphics cards that had already been run at max power for extended lengths of time and were removed because they were misbehaving and not performing calculatory instructions correctly. Do you understand? Can I explain just how bad it is? Yeah, you could go out and buy a graphic card from a scalper, but you were buying a graphic card that had already been run at its peak operating performance for hours. Not just hours, days. Not just days, weeks. Not just weeks, months. Literally ever since the product had been opened and put in a machine. You're buying a used product and you're not paying a used price, and you're buying a product that is already faulted over in order for it to be removed from a mining rig. This is why I never went after a scalper card. Even if I could get the credit together to buy one, you would be buying a defected or affected or effected, whatever term you want to use. You would be buying a card that was probably not new and probably had a very short shelf life. For the vast majority of gamers out there, the 1660 and previous were probably the only card that they could get outside of buying a laptop with a gaming graphics card built in. Now, my 1660 also fades into a kind of an awkward point, and we'll see if we can find this searching real quick. NVIDIA wonders why anyone would buy something without RTX. And there's somewhere in here a quote from one of the NVIDIA executives who, when the 1660 came out, in that era, they wondered aloud, why would you buy anything but a GeForce RTX? Because why would you buy a graphic card without a ray tracing? Now, I'm not seeing the exact quote pop up here. I may not be close enough. But the 1660 series came out when NVIDIA was slagging on its own products, the 1660 series, and being a complete prat about it. Because here's the thing about computing: instruction set architecture. And we can look up on, I'm clicking on Wikipedia, fair enough. It's probably not the most accurate of listen to go to. So we have comparison of instruction set architectures. And then we have a listing of the various architectures that are out there, or at least the ones that are documented on this page. Not saying this is a complete list. I mean, this is Wikipedia. Somebody probably edited to make their particular product look better than it is. But as you can see on the screen, just from that short scroll, there are a large list of computing processing architectures out there. And these are just central processors. You don't see the various list of graphics card processors listed in here, or at least I don't see them. And the catch here is that ray tracing has been around for a very long time. Ray tracing and OpenGL 1.0. Now let's see if this actually gets us anything. This is probably going to... Okay, mouse picking with raycasting, Anton's OpenGL 4. The thing is, ray tracing has been around for a very long time. The catch is that it's not that ray tracing hasn't been useful or hasn't been used to... it's been used in movies for years as a CGI technique to render light realistically. The catch has always been ray tracing has required a certain type of architectural computations, a certain kind of calculator to process those instructions fast enough to give you a real-time result. And while there have been processor architectures in the past capable of running ray tracing calculations at a high enough performance level for real-time feedback, in this case, you'd probably looking at a little company called SGI, Silicon Graphics, which was stylized as SGI, which they filed for bankruptcy. What was this? 2009. But their graphic systems, and if we look at IrisGL and OpenGL, and we're going back to the Ox Reality Engine machines, these Silicon Graphics workstations were capable of running real ray tracing in real time. Now, the catch here is that it was a really tiny window, something like, I'm not even sure we're going to find it if we ray tracing, yeah. We don't find it just searching this page, but ray tracing had been around since SGI. The catch has always been it's never been cheap enough. You always needed very expensive workstations, very expensive servers, very expensive racks of equipment to run the calculation fast enough, and even then it was a tiny, tiny window that they could render in. So NVIDIA was being disingenuous at best, if not outright lying. Take your pick, it's NVIDIA. You decide. NVIDIA wasn't telling the truth about its RTX cores. RTX was nothing new. RTX wasn't even anything good. And if we look up, we want Crytek, ray tracing, demo. And we're probably going to get Neon Noir. And Neon Noir was released, does it give us a date here? Neon Noir has been out for a couple years now, in 2019. And the thing was, when you ran Neon Noir on Vega processors, which were huge on calculatory control, give me a second. I'm also using a different headset, and I really don't want to bring OBS back up to mute it. So, second. Alright, so, Neon Noir showed off that Vega graphic cards, were just as capable of running ray tracing as GeForce card with RTX. With one demo, Crytek had just blown NVIDIA out of the water. RTX wasn't bringing anything new to the table, it wasn't bringing anything useful to the table, and in practical reality, the Vega cards weren't exactly outperformed, I guess I could say. I mean, I only ever had access to a mobile, well, technically a mobile Vega 56, so I never had hands-on real-time with the Vega 64, and I've ranted about why Vega was a bad architecture before. But the other key here, one of the other reasons why ray tracing never took off and is still just a gimmick that has crashed, when I go back here and we just do ray tracing again. And what were some of those comments that were made? Uh, do I still have my list? What did I actually set? Ray tracing and OpenGL1. Okay, one of these, there was somebody who was commenting on that RTX had been a bust, and well, I can always go back, kind of getting beyond the point here. And the point to be taken away from here is that if your instruction set architecture is flexible enough, it can do the kinds of calculations that ray tracing requires. And there was another good example of this, the SunSpark Niagara tool. Or I'm not sure if it's supposed to be Niagara or Niagara. Going back a little too far. But the UltraSpark T2 had a radically different floor plan compared to other processors at the time. And for certain types of threaded instructions, excuse me, the UltraSpark T2 was an absolute monster. It could plow through certain types of calculations that Intel and AMD designs couldn't even get close to touching the performance of. And this is one of the key points when somebody says that they've developed a new architecture. Have they really? Have they really built a new architecture, or have they just revamped somebody's previous architecture, or figured out how to re-implement an architecture that attacked a specific problem very well before, but is no longer on the market? When Sun was bought by, I think even before Sun was bought by Oracle, Oracle got out of the Spark business. And I'm kind of just following the history down here to see how far down we go. Okay. Or as of 2018, Oracle was still announcing Spark processors. And they do have really high processor frequencies, but they process so radically different from an x86 or ARM processor, there's really no comparison. It is a different type of processing architecture. Okay, now that we're talking a little bit about processor architecture, let's go to some of the other windows I have open. Because now we're getting actually to the point, the SteamDeck. And we're going to go to to Tech Specs, and I'm going to browse all the way down. Now I'm going to move this window over to the side. And never really like I built the sky, so I'm kind of just leaving the YouTube window open rather than sending it to another desktop. And we're going to bring up Inkscape, which I, for some reason, hadn't finished clicking through on the setup. Okay, we're just going to grab our square box here, and we're going to look at our processor over here. Okay, we've got a Zen 2 4-core. So we're going to draw 4 boxes, and we're going to kind of put them around each other. I'm going to bring up, I want arrange. Well, I want the arrange tool. Alright, this would have been a good time where I probably should have looked through. Okay, snapping to, oh, oops, grab our arrow, and I want to snap to a grid. Okay, arrange, object, okay, I may have to come here. Oh, align and distribute, that's what I want. Let's get you out here, and we'll do to page, and we'll do center of page, and we'll do you center of page, and oops, as I figure out how this works. Okay, align. That didn't quite work like I wanted it to. Okay, that's kind of what I want. Okay, let's... let's align you on the middle. Okay. Then align you on the middle. Okay, and now we want to move to selection area. Alright, not exactly how I wanted to do that. Obviously, I don't use Inkscape all that very often. Or, I know how I can do this. I really just want... Actually, we will increase the size of this box. Since this box is now in the middle, we will object, transform, and we'll scale 500%. And apply. And we'll change the color. And we will... Can I move this? I'm going to have to bring up full window. I just know it. Okay. So align and distribute. Alright. So now we need a... we want this one. Object raise to top. Object lower to bottom. And okay. Biggest object. And move you against the wall, which should be this one. Since we're doing biggest object, we should be able to do object raise to top. Well, object raise lower to bottom. Object lower to bottom. Where are you? Oh! I haven't done the... We're getting ahead of ourselves. Okay, 2-page. Middle, middle. Middle. Need to copy you. Alright, and biggest object. We want top. And we want middle. And now we want... bottom. And we want middle. Okay. And now we're going to Control C. All right. Trade selection as a group. Okay. Okay. And now we'll do the same thing with these two. Oh, there's our missing box. And okay. Here we go. We are set up. We now have our 4-core, 2-thread box. Okay? Is that really all there is to this? Nope. Let's go back and bring up our SteamDeck. And now we have 8 RDNA2 CUs, computational units. So now we need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now we're going to align these. Well, actually, I know how I'm going to do this. We're going to draw a... So we'll ship you out. We will do transform, rotate, and we'll do a 45, apply. You know, it would have been better if this had been a perfect square. Rotate, apply. All right, now we got our rotation. So we'll take each of these and okay. And now on the outside of our processor, I didn't need to rotate those, did I? I'm missing a box and I'm not exactly sure where it went. Alright, So now we've pretty much got our, and we will, to keep them separately oriented, we'll actually give them a green. Or no, we've already done light blue. We'll go with magenta. Okay, so now we have our 4 cores, 8 threads. We have 8 computational units. And now to each of this, we have 4 32-bit controllers. And we'll actually scale these out a bit. And we will do a oh, I wanted the box. And we'll go for a like gold. Alright. So now we have 4 32-bit memory controllers. And then we have each of these 32-bit memory controllers. Let's actually change this up. We're going to move our GPU components inside the box. Alright, I hope that wasn't too confusing. But we have 8. We have 8 threads, 4 processor cores, 2 threads each. We have 8 computational units for GPU, and we have 4 32-bit controllers that are each talking to, and go with a lighter green for this one, maybe that are talking to 4 gigs of system memory. And now we'll just do lock to lock. And now we'll squinch these in. Okay, so now we have a very rough block diagram. And I do mean rough block diagram of how the processor might talk, how the processor and graphics components might talk to different components of the systems. And now we're going to take some little thin, and we'll go with an orange. We'll take some little thin orange bars. And we'll move these to the bottom. Move it to the bottom. Okay, so we have different ways that each processor could talk to each other or do we have more than we think? There's going through that one that way. Is going through this one that way. And if you figured out what I'm actually drawing here, I'm actually drawing an infinity fabric system where each processor, each component can talk point to point with every other component. This complicated hatchwork, where I'm now just running hatchworks across it, are each GPU component should have a path, a direct path, to every memory controller. Each processor core should have a direct path to each memory controller. Each thread should have a direct path to each memory controller. Each memory controller controls directly. And it says right here, where is it? It is a quad 32-bit channel, 16 gigs. So 4 gigs per each memory controller. Now this does actually give us some fascinating combinations. And let's do, I want, no, that's not what I hit. Thank you very much. Down arrow. Yeah, I probably need a new keyboard. So we've kind of got an idea of what the processor, a block diagram may look like. Now, admittedly, mine's terrible. But let's do that again, this time out in text. We have 4 core, 8 thread. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have a corresponding GPU that can be bound to each core, and each of these blocks could have their own 2 gigabyte of memory. They could each have their own access to 2 gigabytes of memory each. Each core gets its own 2 gigs to work with. Each graphics core gets its own 2 gigs to work with. Can you see where I'm going with this? Because there was another window I had open. Let's keep breaking it down or taking a look at different combinations. We could do our cores lined up so that each of our 2 groups of cores seven, 8. Each of these gets 4 gigabytes each. We could set it up so that our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cores get 8 gigs, and our GPU cores also get 8 gigs. We've actually got a lot of different ways we can assign how and where the memory is going with a quad channel memory system. It can either act as a dual-channel memory system, where one channel for graphics, one channel for processor. It can act as a dual channel for the processor. It can act as a dual channel for the processor and a dual channel for the graphics card at the same time. But that's not the end of it. Radeon Pro SSG. See, AMD's done this thing with using a solid-state drive as video memory. Every single SteamDeck has at least 64 gigabytes of solid-state memory. Okay, well, we don't know how much Valve is going to take up for their operating system and for the Steam runtimes. Actually, we do know how much, because we can tell. Whoa, wrong button. Pull the button, Grunk! Wrong button! We do actually know, because we can look at a standard Linux installation. In a standard Linux installation, your root drive, fully patched and everything, all of the applications that you may want to use, all of that can be run under a root drive that's under 20 gigabytes. So let me pose this question here. How much memory is taken up by Microsoft's operating system on the Xbox Series X? Xbox Series X OS space. And Game Rant, first of all, quickly we see Xbox Series X operating system takes up nearly 200 gigabytes of space. Xbox Series X takes up 131 gigabytes of SSD space. Xbox X reserves a chunk of its 1 terabyte solid-state drive for the OS. 20 gigs. How many programs do I have installed on here? Pretty much everything you could want. What's my Steam library look like? Let's go to home and do installed. Well, that's quite a few bit of games. And that's kind of the point. Here's something else. And this is why Linux as a desktop operating system really matters to the Steam Deck. Because Linux systems have the concept of a swap file. Now, in Windows, and we can do this real quick search on this, Windows virtual memory versus swap. And in Windows, you may be able to set your virtual memory settings. And it uses a portion of your disk drive, or it creates what's known as a page file in Windows to give you, and how you can think about this is, and now we'll go back to our terrible Inkscape skills. We'll delete all of you. What you can think of is, you've got memory block 1. You've got your hard drive. And sitting in between there, you have your system memory, you have your hard drive. Let's actually stick some text on that. RAM, HD. In a typical Windows system, go back to Square, your swap, or your virtual memory, or your page file would be part of your hard drive. But in Linux, on a solid-state drive, at solid-state speeds, your swap can basically become part of your system memory. AMD's already done it. This card, The Pro SSG works on Linux, works on Windows. AMD's already done that. They're already using solid-state drives as the memory buffer in graphics cards. This isn't new. Valve on the SteamDeck is on the base model 64 gigabytes solid state drive, and we know that they probably only really need maybe 20 gigs of that for operating system space, for the Steam, everything that needs to go into Steam, everything that has to do to make Steam operate. It can all fit in either user space on the SD card, or it can fit inside 20 gigabytes of space on the operating system, assuming it's installed to root. Now, there actually is a very good point here, and that I don't know for a fact that this is how Valve is going to set the Steam Deck up. I don't know if they're going to have an EFI bootloader. I don't know that they're going to have the root as a completely separate partition. I don't know that they're going to have the swap as a completely separate partition. And I don't know that they're going to have the home and the user files as a completely separate partition. Now, I do know that this is a very good, secure way to set up the computer, because a user, by default, only has access to the home partition. And if you set it up as a physically separate partition, you've increased the barrier for anybody compromising your computer to access your root drive or your boot information. And so I would suspect that what we're going to see on the Steam Deck is we're going to see 32 gigs of space set aside for the the actual operating system space, and 32 gigs exposed for the end user to install games and other additional software on. And that way, the Steam Deck will have plenty of space to run the install, which on this one, fully loaded desktop system, is not even cracking 16 gigs, so that's half the space. Could be half the space of the solid state drive. Half the space wouldn't even be okay. You could bump into that limit if you're updating all of your applications at once and all of the package files are installed at once, but we don't know how Valve's running the package manager yet. But this is why I say that. Hey, you're a lawnmower. I'm gonna. Yeah. Hopefully that's a little better. Okay. The point here is that with the Steam Deck, Valve could possibly use the swap on the solid state drive for either graphics memory, giving an extra large frame buffer, or they could use it as system memory. If you feed a modern high-end graphic card, let's say we'll look up TechArp GPU guide. Probably hasn't been updated in a while. Alright, desktop graphic card revision, TechArp, and we'll just look at the AMD ATI full list. And this is probably going to break my screen. And how recent are we? Yeah, let's pop you open and have a look. Alright, TechArp we're all the way down to the Radeon RX series. Alright, and on the RX series, what's our memory count? Max TDP, pixels, core, pixel, memory type, memory size. Okay, so on the top end, the 6800, we've got 16 gigabytes of video memory. On the 5600, we've got 6 gigs. On the 5500 XT, we've got 4 gigs, 8 gigs. On the RX 57, we had 8 gigs. So if we think about what the RX 5700 was capable of with 8 gigabytes of video memory, we may have a pretty good idea of what? And what was this? Let's go back and look at the actual SteamDeck specifications again. It's telling us up to 1.6 teraflop floating point 32. 1.6 teraflops. Do we have a teraflop rating over here? 1.6 teraflops. We have gigatexels. We have pixels per second. Do we have an actual rating for teraflops? Memory bandwidth. We just have gigatexels and pixel fill rate. So we have in it, we have an idea of how many operations it can perform. We have an idea of how many units it has. If we come back over here, do we have anything? Pixel shaders, textures, clock, ROPS. We don't have anything that really splits down the calculate unit. Or let's see if we can check this up. Okay. Radeon 5700 CU. And Big Navi reportedly has twice as many CUs as Radeon's XT. Alright, 80 total compute units. So 40 compute units. So we're not quite looking at 57. We're definitely not looking, we think, at 57 performance. Well, 57 was not RDNA 2. We're probably looking at something that's in the range of, and what we really don't know here is exactly how AMD is counting the RDNA 2 calculation units. And I'm using calculation units because I know that they call it core something. Uh, compute units. Okay, that's fine. One. All right, but the probably relevant comparison here is the PS5 is fitted with 36 RDNA 2 compute units. Okay, that sounds pretty good. That means that the um, PlayStation 5 would be what? 36 divided by 8, 16, 32. 4 times, a little bit over 4 times more powerful per resolution. Well, that's not really true either, because developers are saying that the pixel per pixel at 1200 by 800 uh, the Steam Deck is comparable to the Xbox Series X. How many Zen 2 cores does it have? Well, let's see what Eurogamer says. Accept all cookies. See you. Alright. Okay, 8X, Jaguar cores. Okay, Xbox Series X is using 52 CUs. So, 52 CUs on the Xbox Series X to get 4K performance with ray tracing. And the Steam Deck is managing that. And the calculation here is 12 teraflops. The Steam Deck is 1.6 teraflops. So if you're working the scaling out here, what's the teraflop on the Xbox Series S? This is actually This is actually an analysis I do agree with. Calculating by teraflops are misleading. And as pointed out here, the R9 Fury X had 9.6 teraflops, and it was worse than the GTX 1070 at 6.5 teraflops until you got up into higher resolutions, at which point other factors came into play. So we can't really compare what we've seen from what we've heard from developers per pixel. The Steam Deck is as powerful and me as an Xbox Series X. Probably putting it in 1080, 1920 by 1080, a very common desktop resolution, probably in the same performance range maybe as the Xbox Series S. Maybe a little bit weaker. That's still a significant amount of 1080 performance. Like I said, let's go back to that tech art page, because that actually has where I was going with this. What we're actually looking for, and what actually matters, is the ROPS, the raster operations, how quickly, how wide the bus is to get those pixels onto the display. All we really know about the Steam Deck right now, in terms of what it can output over its dock, is that it's DisplayPort 1.4 with alt mode support. So we can pretty much assume it does FreeSync, it does HDR. We've already heard a couple developers say it calculates HDR internally just fine. May not display HDR on the screen. But let's think about that for a second. We know that teraflops really don't matter if you can't put that power down. We really do know that this looks like an Infinity Fabric board able to give vast amounts of memory in a large number of different directions at one time. It's a quad channel 32-bit. That's an overly... I think we're really looking at an Infinity Fabric system, not a traditional memory controller setup. I don't think this is anything like the ring controllers of AMD past. And we also know that it's using the low power DDR5. Thus, we know that the memory is going to be probably keeping pace with the speed of the GPU. So given all of that, and raising the possibility that the Steam Deck could, at any time, use the solid-state drive for additional system memory or additional video memory, what stats don't we know about that really would determine how powerful this actually is? We don't know the ROPS yet. Nobody said anything about how the external display controller, how good it is at putting pixels from the system to the display. And that was the Achilles heel. One of the reasons why, and I've stated this in the past, I never went for for any of the cards that were theoretically more powerful than my R9 2X. Because if we go all the way back to the R9 2X, we dive back in time all the way to 213. And I'm pretty sure I've got the 4GB model. Yeah, I know I have the 4GB model. If we look down there and we scroll down and we see the various calculations, and then we get to the one number that actually matters, the ROPS. Compared to all of the other cards at the time, the R9 290X had an astounding back end. And that was one of the reasons why all of the subsequent R9 cards, as we go down and we look at them, we get back into 64, 128. Well, this was a 2X. The R9 380X went back to 32 ROPS, and that was a vast decrease in real-world performance as the resolution scaled. Now, what I'm thinking is as we're looking at this, if we go back to TechArp and we look at the NVIDIA side, we see that NVIDIA loved a 48 count ROP. And we'll do NVIDIA graphics cards, full list. And since I have one right here, we'll go pick on the 6600 Ti for a minute. Scroll all the way down. 6600 Ti. Scroll down. Yep, 48 ROPS. So the 6600 Ti should have actually been better than its equivalent mid-rangers from the AMD to Polaris series. But it wasn't. The 6600 Ti didn't scale up any higher in resolution, effective resolution, than the Polaris parts. Well, that's because there's other blocks inside the system. The graphics card is limited by more factors than just the memory bus, the ROP count, and the other determinable factors. And we've seen this time and time again where we've had one graphics card come along and says it has very good specifications on paper, but the ultimate product isn't worth anything. And I've actually still got one of those graphics cards. I mean, it's not any good, but I got one. And I can't believe there's still a support site. I have an XGI Valeri, and when it came out so many years ago, it was hailed as a transformative new architecture. And in some games that were optimized, it was not bad. But it never really had a good OpenGL driver, and its DirectX driver was questionable at best. And most people today could never talk about a Valeri. Little surprise. Okay. So let's try and wrap this up. We can suspect and draw conclusions that Valve has some options open to them to make SteamDeck more powerful and more capable than its initial series specifications would suggest. I suspect that's why they're using the socketed 2230M.2 modules and they're not intending for end-user replacement. I strongly suspect if we go back up and look at the overview, or we look at the hardware in the deck, we're probably looking at a vapor-changing cooling system, and the solid-state drive is likely bound under that cooling system, and thus even if you got down to it, it's probably soldered or clipped into place. And another thing that I'd note as this circles through its different perspectives, those were some interesting screws on the back. I think you may be able to take the back plate off, I think, looks like. And another thing, I'm to all the scalpers out there who pre-purchased the Steam Deck and resold it. Yeah, that Steam Deck was tied to your Steam account. Unless you're also selling the Steam Access login and the credit card information that you use to make that purchase, which could be illegal in some countries, I think. If somebody signs into your Steam Deck after powering it on and it's not the person who bought it, what are the chances Valve locks it out? Thought about scalping a Steam Deck? You might want to think again. It's just not a good idea. Alright, so going back to the hardware and trying to get a good look at the back of that screen. Okay, we have the SD card slot is being pointed at somewhere on the bottom. And we'll do tech specs. And, okay, do we have a picture at the bottom? Okay, it's pointing at the micro SD card slot on the bottom. So, again, I think we're dealing with a vapor change cooling system. And, okay. I wanted to come back to the reason I brought up the Valeri cards. Because there was another one before Valeri. In fact, there was actually a very successful implementation of the one before. the ST Microelectronics Cairo. You might know them today as Imagination Technologies, aka the company that Apple kicked to the curb to design their own GPUs in place of. Alright, the thing is, there have been lots of different graphic card manufacturers who have come along and tried to turn the market from a duopoly between ATI and NVIDIA, then AMD and NVIDIA, into a triopoly. Because at one point you did have a triopoly between 3DFX, NVIDIA, and ATI, 3DFX. Bring them up and look at them. 3DFX was eventually all their assets were brought up by NVIDIA. NVIDIA then promptly spewed all over the 3DFX legend with the scalable link interface, which, as noted, never really did work as advertised. By that same note, Crossfire never did really work as advertised either, but to be fair, I don't think AMD ever really had their heart in Crossfire as a multi-GPU sales point, but more as if NVIDIA can do it, we better be able to do it. Alright, and that brings us back to what I think the future holds for the Steam Deck. Now we're kind of getting to the last part of this. And that the first Steam Deck, the reason why I think this is going to be such a sales success is it's probably more powerful and more capable than its initial specifications let on. I think Valve honestly was trying to pull the wool over with the dual channel memory controller until somebody said, hang on, that's not adding up. What exactly is going on there? And then they come out and it's really a quad channel 32-bit for the maximum fill rate listed here of 5,500 MTs per second. And looking through the other specifications, looking at how Linux itself can actually function with a swap file and with different components of the actual operating system, how you could set this up. I don't know that how I have my system set up is how the Steam Deck is going to be set up. I think this is the most secure way to set it up, and I can prove it's the most secure way. Just as I can prove that sudo should be torched from orbit on the Steam Deck. And we're going to take that tangent real quickly. Why should sudo be torched? And I'm going to bring up a real world example. In that you can add almost any repository to a system using sudo, using single user do once. And then once that repository is installed using single user do once, or switch user do once, depending on your interpretation, any software from it can be installed at any time. If you have a Linux computer and you've got sudo enabled on it, all it takes is somebody with malicious intent to run a sudo command to add a repository of their own, and then your system is hijacked and you cannot stop it. Torch sudo. If you're going to use SU, if you're going to switch user, enter the password. Actually force somebody to have to enter a password to take a step to keep them out of your root partition and your actual operating system. Sudo is insecure by default. It is designed to be a security nightmare. This is not optional. This is not up for debate. And I don't know if Valve will take the time to listen to, what am I on, an hour or so? And at the same time, I kind of just had a brief... I did leave a streaming window open somewhere, so I've actually been streaming to something, right? Oh boy. A brief moment when you realize you may have made a critical error after 2 hours of talking your throat out. Because I don't see an open streaming window on this system. Oh. Let's check the laptop. What do we got going on over here? Alright, yeah, I know I just went silent. It's gonna be incredibly embarrassing if that's what I did. If I just... I'm 99% certain I just spent 2 hours streaming to nothing. Well, that's frustrating. This is Aurian Archive. I'm do this again later.